Hey guys, it's Ashley with Blue Hill Glass. I'm back again today to show you another fun 3D project. So today I'm going to show you how to create this really cool pineapple, and I'm not going to make you wait to the end to see it. This is how she looks. She's stunning. It's so cool, and I can't wait for you guys to see how this project came together. So to create this project, I used our D20 Jig that's available at bluehillglass.com, and I want to come up with more ways, more patterns to use our jigs we already have. So if you have any suggestions of some cool 3D patterns that you'd like to see come to life, let me know in the description below and I will see what I can come up with. So I just put this one on top of a light base, so I can change the color. I can have a red pineapple, I can have a green pineapple if I'm feeling like it. For those of you who have already purchased our D20 Jig in the past, this pattern is going to be on sale for the first week that this video is posted. And then I'm also going to be offering the pineapple pattern for free for that first week for anyone who purchases the D20 Jig. So very exciting news, and I hope you guys enjoy this tutorial. If you like these tutorials, please subscribe to our channel, leave me a comment below, and go ahead and check out our socials. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and Facebook at Blue Hill Glass Studio. Okay guys, let's get started. So after you've already cut out your pattern, traced it onto your glass, cut it, ground it, and foiled it, we're here to our soldering tutorial. So you should have 20 triangles, 10 trapezoids, 5 of each petal. So last time I showed you how to use this jig to make a D20, and I just want to talk about a couple little tips I've learned since that first video before we get started. So first, remember that this jig is made with plastic, so it should only be used for tack soldering. So tack soldering just means I put my pieces in place, I tack them together, and then I take them out of the jig to finish soldering the rest of the project. The reason for this is because since it's plastic, if you're soldering on your jig, the solder is going to stick to your jig and it's going to melt it. You should not have any major meltage or any smoke when using the jig properly. So you can see this is my original jig that I used in that original D20 video, and since then I've made quite a few D20s with this jig, and this is how mine looks. So very minimal burn. Most of it is here in the center, and that's just where the hot flux has pulled down into the bottom. And it doesn't really matter that it melted there because it doesn't matter for assembling it. It still goes together just fine. Some of these divots here is because when on the very first one that I made, I was putting the completed shape while it was still hot in the jig just to hold it to do the outer seams. And I don't do that anymore because I noticed that it was causing that damage. But it's still fully functional even with the damage that I caused to it. I just use wedges now to do the outer seams, and so I'll make this thing last for years and years and years. Another issue that I've seen come up is that some people are tinning the pieces before they put them into the jig. So just tinning, if you're new to stained glass, just means putting a small amount, very thin layer of solder, quickly brushing it over the side here and doing that on all the sides. And so I do not recommend tinning for any of these projects. This includes my succulent jig, my TI jig, D12 jig, all of our jigs. I do not recommend tinning it. It might be an appropriate method for certain ways of assembling 3D projects, but for our 3D projects and our jigs, we don't recommend it. And the reason for that is if you go ahead and tin this and then you try to put it in the jig, it's not going to sit flush. It's not going to get as close a seam as I've got right here. And our ultimate goal is tight, small seams. So if I put additional solder on this by tinning it, it's just gonna make it harder for all of the pieces to fit together. And especially with 3D projects, once you get to the last piece, it's going to make your project bigger and swollen because all of these seams are cluttered with additional solder it doesn't need. So do not pre-tin your 3D projects for our applications. You want them to sit as close as possible to each other to give a good fit. All right, so let's get started. I'm going to be using Novacan Old Master Stained Glass Flux. Now this flux goes a long way. You really don't need a whole lot, and especially doing a 3D project, I'm not going to need that much. I think sometimes this gets a bad rap, this brand, and I think it's because people are using too much. If it's spitting at you, you're using way too much. A lot of times, now this is a fresh brush, but a lot of times if I have a brush I've been reusing, I don't even have to dip it that much because there's a lot of flux in the bristles. So keep that in mind. If it's spitting at you, you're using too much. Okay, so I've turned my soldering iron on and I've set it to 360 degrees Celsius. That's usually a good starting point for doing 3D projects, but if I need to crank it up, I will. So when you purchase our pineapple pattern, I strongly recommend that you cut out the pieces and tape them together and assemble it like this. I like to do this just because I'm not a visual mathematical thinker like that, and so it just helps me see what is to come and what I need to be doing and have a plan. So this is kind of what it looks like if you tape it together, and you can just put this on your desk nearby so you can have kind of a view of what it's going to look like. So I'm going to be creating this shape right here. If you can see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, that is the conical point that we have here on our D20. So that's what I'm going to be making right now. All right, so we're going to need 3 of our triangles, and I'm just feeling for which side of the glass is the front or the back side. Usually the smooth side will be the front and the more textured side will be the back. So I'm putting the back side up. And now with the trapezoids, I'm going to need 2 of those, and the same thing, I want to put the back side up, and I'm going to angle them in the jig like this. Okay, so you can see if these were triangles, that would be a little cutoff space. All right, and now I've got to line these up. So I'm looking at this outer top seam, and I'm trying to get all of them all the way around, lined up as equally as possible. So when making 3D projects, you really want to be a perfectionist to make sure that it all comes together in the end. All right, so now that they're all lined up, I'll just take a little bit of my flux and I'm going to put it about 1/4 of an inch down from the top of that edge. All right, so now I've got my 60-40 solder, and if you wanted to make this lead-free, I'm just making it as like a nice lamp that you could put on your table. So I don't really want to make mine lead-free. It's not worth the added expense for me, but if you wanted to, you definitely could. You just want to crank up the temperature of the iron a little bit higher to do lead-free. So now I'm tacking them together. That just means I use a really small amount of solder to get the pieces stuck together. One thing is you don't want to put too much down. For one reason is you're going to burn your mold. And number 2 is if you made a mistake with lining them up, if you put a lot of solder down, it's going to be harder to take it apart and fix it. So while I have you here, I want to use this opportunity to explain that you really don't want to be soldering in the jig anyway, even though it isn't heat proof. It really doesn't need to be, because when you're soldering, your solder wants the solder line to be level. If it's not level, the solder is going to fall down and it's going to go down into the middle instead of laying flat. So that is another reason why it's great to just take it out of your jig, and you can use some wedges, or here I could even just do it with the weight of it there to solder that seam while the seam is flat instead of being pitched like this inside the jig. It's not going to give as good a look. Of course, this is the inside of this particular project, but if you're making a jewelry box with this and you're going to be seeing the inside of it, you really don't want to have lumpy solder lines. And if you solder something at an angle like that, it's going to be lumpy. So keep that in mind. Okay, so now let's add some more pieces. So I've got my paper model over here to guide me. So after I've got this shape, I'm gonna take it and pull it up, and I'm gonna have these two, the trapezoid and the triangle, I'm gonna have these two resting on two of the wedges, and then I'm going to take two triangles, 1, 2, and one of the trapezoids, and slide that in there, and then I'm going to make that 5-sided shape again. So once again, line them up, put some flux on it, and tack them together. Now we're starting to form the bottom of the pineapple. This is so exciting. This has got a kind of a lot of wiggle to it. So what I think I'm gonna do is put it back in the jig and just give it a couple more tacks, because it's so wiggly. I want to make sure that I don't get the angles off. So I know I need more flux if I'm not getting that beautiful sizzle sound. If I'm not getting that, then that kind of tells me I don't have enough flux, and then my solder is not going to stick to my tape. Okay, so that's got a lot more strength, just adding those couple more. So I'm going to do that on this side. Oh yeah, we've got a lot more strength. So I think going forward with this one, I'm going to continue to do 2 tacks, one here and one here. I never had to do that on any of my other 3D projects, but I think just the way this one's being assembled, it just needs a little more support as I go. So here's what it looks like from my perspective. Got those, the trapezoid and the triangle there, and then I'll add 2 triangles. Trying to find the back side, and 1 trapezoid. Okay, so here's what she looks like. Line up those edges and add flux and tack. Where we are, and now we have our last seam to close up on the bottom. You can take this side or that side, it doesn't matter. Put the triangle and trapezoid in a corner, and now we're going to add a triangle, another triangle, and the trapezoid. So this piece is kind of falling down, as you can see. So I'm just gonna lift it up with my hand to line it up. And I'm just kind of pushing them all into place so that I get them lined up just as good as possible. Now I'm gonna brush on that flux and tack it together. Alright, so I'm going to attach that and our last triangle to make the bottom part of the pineapple. Okay, and look how nicely that lines up inside. Alright, so just using my hand to kind of push it down because it's trying to spread apart. So I'm going to brush that on, and I'm going to use my hand to just get a little bit of pressure here. Alright, so now I'm going to repeat this. I'm going to make another one because, as you can see from my little paper mock-up, this is the bottom and the top is the exact same. So let's do that. Now I'm going to use these wedges that I made to just hold up the pieces so that that seam is level to the ground. Another reason, remember, why we really don't want to solder in here, because it's not going to give us straight seams. You can see how just my beads, my little tack beads, some of them dripped and moved. That's because they were at an angle pointing towards the center of the jig. All right, so I'm just going to line up so that all of my seams here are level, and I'm going to brush on flux, and then I'm going to solder them. Okay, so there is that first seam going around. Now let's do around all of these. All right, now I've got my inside seams done, and I'm just going to knock this extra solder that's here off, because I'm going to be adding that top piece, and that's going to get in the way. And so to melt that away, just use gravity, apply the heat, and then shake, and it'll fall right off. All right, so now I'm going to go ahead and do the outside seams of this piece. So some wedges would definitely come in handy here. I found from making a lot of 3D projects that the best way to do the outer seams is to brush on your flux. And actually, I'm going to turn the temp down for the edges here. I'm just going to tin the edges of the seam, and then I'm going to go back with a bead. And then it's up to you how thick you make this bead. I like to go nice and thick and really round so it has a good look. But to do that, sometimes depending on the seam, you might have to put down a quick tinned layer and then let it cool and then put another layer. It just depends. so now that I've finished this one, I'm gonna go ahead and do, this one's gonna be the bottom piece. So I'm gonna set this one to the side, and you guys already watched this once, so let's just skip ahead until I'm done. So now I've got the inside soldered, the outside soldered, and now I'm gonna come back to tinning this seam right here. I've already tinned it, but I wanna do the edges. And so this is gonna be the bottom of my pineapple, where we can put a candle if we want, or I can put it on top of a light base. And if you wanted to close this up, you totally could. You just need to cut a pentagon that size, and then you can put it into place. But I'm gonna leave mine open. And so what I'm doing here, I'm just doing the edge. So after brushing it with flux, I take a little bit on the tip of my iron and I do that up and down motion. Allow it to hold a couple seconds and then spin. And remember, we're always wanting our seam level to the ground. All right, so we're gonna take both of these and we're going to put them together. Now, just from human error, you're gonna have a little bit of gaps. Some things are gonna be a little bit higher than others. It's just part of the process. So just spin it around until you got it where it looks pretty even on all of the sides, or as close as you can get it. And you can always spin it and keep trying to find a better fit. See, that fits way better. We just have that one larger seam right there. Actually, I think I'll just do it vertically like this. That way I don't have to compete with gravity. I'm gonna line it up as best I can, and then I'm gonna apply the flux to the seam. And it's gonna be a little, just a little bit of solder to hold those seams together. I will spin that up so you can see what that looks like. So that's all I did, just a quick little tack. And I'm gonna do that going all the way around. Some of these are not wanting to stick that vertical direction, so let's just try, now that I've already got a couple tacked, let's just try doing it this way. There we go, much easier. We've got these together. I think that all of these are going to be just fine. The only one, because they're so close together, the only one, this one is my biggest gap here. So I'm going to go ahead and solder all of these, and then I'll show you what I'll do for the solution for soldering that, because it's a larger gap. All right, now we're back to this wide seam. And one thing that you can do to solve this is you could, if you're able to, get your soldering iron down in here, and you could solder the back side of it with 50-50 solder, and then you could solder the front outer side of it with 60-40, because 50-50 melts at a higher temperature. Soldering with that on the inside is gonna be like a plug to keep it from the 60-40 from bleeding through if it got too hot, and to kind of bridge that gap there. If you don't have 50-50, and you can do this in addition to the 50-50 if you want. This is a little trick that I showed in my D20 video. Actually, a TikTok follower suggested it in one of my lives. So what you just want to do is take some copper foil, and I'm gonna get this silver lined here because that's what I used on the other pieces. And I'm just going to peel it off, and I'm going to break off a piece that is about that wide. And I already see here where I don't know why I tinned that one, but it's kind of a little bit bumpy, so I'm just going to kind of scrape off as much of it as I can, because I really want that seam to be flat, as flat as possible. Okay, so now I'm just going to take that little piece of copper foil tape, and I'm going to take it and put it into that seam. And it's a little longer than I need. I'm just gonna rip off the excess. And that one I think I can even push down. So now you're gonna take your finger or your burnisher, and you're going to push it down into that seam. Okay, and now you want to take your burnisher, and you want to scrape it along each side. And then you want to scrape it down on the top there. And it doesn't matter if it's a little bit bumpy, because it's not going to show through as long as it's tucked down and it's lower than your outer foil seam there. You're just making like a little trough just to keep the solder from going through. Okay, so this is how it looks. And now I'm gonna go ahead and solder that. Let me put my gloves back on. If you can get your soldering iron inside, see if you can go ahead and just at least tin that inside seam. If you can't, it's still really sturdy and strong, so don't stress about it too much if it's a challenge for you. I'm just going to tin it real quick just so that you just don't see the copper color. Alright, so I'm going to show you guys, hopefully you can see right here is the seam. Alright, so let's get started. I'm going to turn the iron back down for this part. And so if you look at our little mock-up here, our smaller pieces are on the inside and our bigger pieces are on the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to tack this to the inside seam here, and I'm just going to try and center it up, and I'm going to do it pretty square, so 90-degree angle going up. And let's just go ahead and put some flux going around on the piece and on the pineapple yellow part and on the green leaf. Then I'm just going to hold this. Do it at an angle you guys could hopefully see. And I'm just going to tack the corners. And if you're doing this barehanded, put a towel between your fingers because you do not want to drop solder on yourself. All right, and so that is a little too much of an angle. I want it to be straight up and down. So I'm just going to melt this and kind of get it to release a little and go more straight. Let's see. There we go. There we go. Now we got it straight up and down. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and go around and add my other pieces. Don't be afraid to put on any flux right now because this is just tacking these pieces in place. So use as much flux as you need. And that one's kind of put out more than I want, so I'm just going to heat it back up and get it more perpendicular. So you can see that's the angle I'm working with right now. And you can see that these two, if you get your angle correctly, that these two will meet up together. All right, well, I've got these three here. I'm gonna go ahead and solder them a little bit more sturdily into place because as I add more leaves, it's just gonna make it even harder to get them held well. When you've got a gap like that, you kind of just have to bridge it as best you can. And that's got, see how I'm doing little blobs? I'm gonna go for even smaller blobs because if I try to do a bunch at one time, it's just not gonna take. It's gonna keep falling through. You can see now I've bridged it with a little bit of patience. Actually, before I do that, let me tin these inside petals and do this seam here, because if I don't do it now, it'll be very hard to do it later. So this is the seam that I'm doing, where the green piece meets the yellow. So now we've got a really strong hold on these. They're soldered down here towards the yellow and they're soldered on the inside seam. The only thing I didn't do was solder this seam. I'm actually gonna remove a little bit there, and the reason for that is I don't wanna create any space to make it difficult to add these. Now, if you just want to add these leaves, you don't want to do the second layer, you can totally do that. The choice is up to you. All right, so now I'm gonna add this guy. Now I'm going to add these next, but before I do that, I think I'm going to go ahead and do these seams all the way around here. I'm going to avoid putting any solder in the seam next to the yellow because I don't want to make any hindrance there. Okay, so before I go forward, I'm gonna go ahead and do these stems. Now, if you want to, you could, I know I said don't pre-tin stuff, but if you wanted to, you could have gone ahead and pre-tinned this, the sides and the back side. But if you decide to do that, just don't get too close to the edge. I would just not go any further than here, just so that you don't get any solder in the way. So I'm just going to just quickly tin these before we put the other leaves on. So now we're going to add our outer petals. Now these are going to be harder to solder once they're on here because the angle is going to be pretty tight. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pre-tin these, and I'm just going to do it very, very lightly. I do not want to put too much solder where there's any bumps or anything. It's just going to be a very light tinning, and I definitely don't want to put any solder on the edge there on the bottom. All right, so now we're going to put our outer petals on. Now, another little way you could do this, instead of tacking them on like I did, you could actually just assemble both of the rings, because if you cut the pattern correctly, all of them will line up perfectly like this. So you could assemble them to make a ring and assemble this to make a ring and then fit them on there. But I just thought this way might be a little bit easier, especially if you don't have another angle maker tool. You know, this is just okay to just eyeball it and tack it into place. So let's go ahead and get started with the outside ring. These seams here are going to be really hard to clean after I put the next layer on. So I'm just going to spray them with a little bit of quick clean. So I'm just going to spray them with a little bit of quick clean, and then I'm going to be using a scratch-free scrub pad that I have cut up into pieces. And I'm just going to focus on these seams here, because they will be the ones that will be almost impossible to get the flux off of. And of course, we'll still spray flux down in there and clean it as best we can. But I just want to prevent any oxidation from happening on there. Okay, so now that that's done, let's add our last pieces. I'm so excited. All right, so we're gonna take our leaf, I'm just gonna pull that one up a bit, and we're gonna put it onto our pineapple. And I'm going to show you from this angle kind of what it's going to look like. You're going to push it down so you have a little bit of gap here, and that's just going to be a good little space to add some solder to get those two leaves and the pineapple part, the yellow part, to stick. And so you can see how these two pieces line up pretty well. So I'm just going to kind of hold this one in place where I want it. And where's my brush? Here you are. I'm going to put some flux there, and then I'm just going to tack it right at that angle. It doesn't have to be perfect. Just get it as close as you can. And now I'm going to spin it and put another piece on there. And I can tack those two together too. I'm just tacking because if I do get the angle off, which I'm kind of freehanding it here, so it is possible to happen, I can take it off easily. All right, so that's what we've got. And I think that looks good. So let's keep moving around. Let's spin over here and do this one. And I can see that green one needs a little bit more of a pitch, so I'm just pulling it out. And there we go. That is so cool, guys. All right, so now let's go ahead and get this cleaned up. And so with some of these bigger gaps, remember that you can add foil if you want. Since this one's just going through to solder on the other side, I'm just going to do my little bridge trick. I'm just making little bridges. Because if it goes through and sticks to the solder on the other side, that's fine. So I've got those little holes there. I'm gonna let that cool and come back. And I think that one's probably my biggest gap, so it shouldn't be a problem on most of them. All right, now that we've got all that soldered, now I'm just gonna do some touch-ups. So now we're ready to clean her up. So I'm just taking that quick clean that I had. Make sure that it's cooled down a good bit before you spray. And I'm just going to completely douse it in quick clean. Because there's some angles I really can't get to. But I'm going to just cover it as best I can. And I'm going to take this scrubby and I'm going to get down in the cracks and try to remove as much as of that flux as possible. Now she's cleaned up. You can see she's super, super shiny. If you want to add patina, you can do that now. For me, I'm just going to add some polish. So I like to use Mother's brand car wax. It works just as good as stained glass polish. And I'm going to put some onto my paper towel. And then I'm just going to buff it into the piece. And you can see it's already taking off a lot of gunk. And I'm leaving a little bit on there. I'm not trying to completely buff it off. I'm gonna let that dry overnight, and then I'll take a soft cloth and buff all that off. I can use a toothpick to get all of the seams, get the polish out of the seams. And here's the final look. I just wanted to show you guys what it looked like without the light underneath it. Still really cool. And you could also put like a electric candle under there. Lots of possibilities. So if you make this project, be sure to tag me at Blue Hill Glass Studio on all socials. See you guys next time.